Thank you for coming to my talk today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career in public policy. I currently work in NOAA's Office for Coastal Management as the manager of the Coastal Communities Program. The need to connect science and decision-making has never been greater. A key role of science is to inform decisions and help society understand how the world works, how it's changing, implications for people, likely consequences of those different policy options, as well as what the viable solutions are. To give you a little bit of background on my research experience as an ecologist, I studied coral diseases in the Caribbean as an undergrad at Cornell University, and I did my dissertation research at Oregon State University on the impacts of environmental stress on rocky intertidal mussels. I really started diving into science policy as a postdoc at the Florida State University Coastal and Marine Laboratory, where I was studying the impacts of drought on oysters in a downstream ecosystem, Apalachicola Bay, working with staff and researchers at the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve. And throughout this process, it became clear that it really wasn't just about the impacts on the ecosystem, it was about the impacts on people's livelihoods and the economy. And so I started working more closely with the resource managers as well as with the fishery. This experience led me to want to better understand career pathways in science policy and how I could better bring my knowledge of ecosystems to the federal government. And so I applied for and was awarded a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, where they bring PhD scientists, engineers, doctors, and others to DC to work in federal agencies on issues that connect science and society. My AAAS fellowship placement was at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and I'm still working at NOAA over a decade later. I've had a few various roles and been in different offices. I started off in the NOAA Climate Program office and was there for about 4 years. I then went on a rotation, which we call a detail, from NOAA to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy for a few years, and am now working in NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. In the NOAA Climate Program office, I had a couple of different roles. I helped to connect NOAA's climate science and ecosystem and natural resource management work and created some partnerships around that. I served as an author on the 3rd U.S. National Climate Assessment on the Coasts chapter. I worked with a team of others to create a new working group, interagency working group at the U.S. Global Change Research Program on adaptation science that was intended to bring together all the different federal agencies that work on science that can help inform our understanding and adaptation solutions to the impacts of climate change that we know are already happening. I also supported the Interagency Climate Change Adaptation Task Force and the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force. These were both interagency efforts to, again, bring together the federal family to address climate impacts in the case of the Adaptation Task Force and to help rebuild better in the case of Hurricane Sandy Task Force. At the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, I was brought in as a NOAA detailee to lead OSTP's resilience portfolio under President Obama's Climate Action Plan. President Obama released his Climate Action Plan in 2013, and I showed up a few months later to help to implement a number of the different activities under that plan. This was a major effort with many different individuals involved and many different federal agencies. While I was at OSTP, I also created and led a White House Climate Education and Literacy Initiative to try to improve climate literacy of what we called K to Gray, so kids all the way through adults, and help folks understand what educational resources are available and how we could inspire lifelong learning around the topic of climate change. As part of that, one of my favorite fun activities was I led a partnership on climate and sports. And this is a picture of some of the folks we engaged in that effort playing basketball at the White House court. I now work in NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. This office helps with informing coastal management around the country. We work with all coastal states, including Great Lakes states and territories of the United States. We have several different programs: the National Coastal Zone Management Program, the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, which again I had worked with as a postdoc, so it was nice to kind of come home and connect with that program in my new role. The Coral Reef Conservation Program, as well as Digital Coast, which is a platform for sharing coastal information, tools, and services. My current roles and responsibilities in NOAA's Office for Coastal Management include leading the National Coastal Zone Management Program, which again is a partnership with 34 coastal states and territories to implement the Coastal Zone Management Act. So we provide formula funding to the coastal states to implement different policies and programs around things like public access, hazard resilience, habitat restoration, etc. I also engage with the Coastal States Organization, which is a non-governmental organization that works with the state coastal managers. I lead the team of NOAA liaisons to the coastal states. So we have liaisons from NOAA to all of the coastal state management programs. And I also oversee a lot of our coastal resilience grants related work, particularly a major partnership we have with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I'd now like to talk just a little bit about some of the challenges for early career scientists who are interested in engaging in the policy arena. I think there's still the perception that time spent engaging with decision makers is potentially a distraction or a detraction away from research. There can also be the issue that there's a lack of training opportunities in terms of communicating science with policymakers, and this really is a skill set that needs hands-on experience and practice. There's also the perception that young scientists aren't credible. I don't believe that that is a valid perception, but I think that that is one that even sometimes senior ecologists might have in terms of who they might trust to engage with policymakers. There's also the misalignment of incentives and values between academia in terms of publications and grant funding really being primarily what folks are valued for, versus the policy arena where it's about relationship building and communication and doing work that directly informs policy and management. On the other hand, there are a lot of benefits of engaging as an early career scientist. Early engagement and partnerships with decision makers helps scientists improve their communication skills early in their careers, which will serve folks well no matter what career path they end up choosing in the future. It can also enhance scientists' understanding of real-world information needs. What do decision makers actually want to know that might help them understand how the world works, or a major challenge that's being faced in their districts, or whatever that is where ecological knowledge could be relevant? And again, engaging early can ensure from the outset and throughout a project, if someone's doing research, that the science that they're doing will actually be useful and relevant. And everyone wants their science to be used. So I really see this as a win-win. In terms of building skills and getting in the door, there are a number of science policy fellowship programs that you can check out online. The AAAS S&T Science and Technology Policy Fellowship is the one that I used to get in the door, and it was incredibly valuable for me. There's also the Knaus Marine Policy Fellowship for folks particularly who have interest and experience in ocean, coastal, and Great Lakes science. There's the Presidential Management Fellowship and the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education, or ORISE, internships and fellowships. And then there's also a wide variety of internships and fellowships at different federal agencies. And there are also a number of communication and media training workshops that can provide folks with hands-on experience. And like I talked about, practice is really, really important. I also don't believe that everyone should or needs to leave academia to do this type of work. There are a number of very impactful scientists who are ecologists in academia who do work that informs policy or who communicate directly with decision makers. And I should say that when I say decision makers, I don't necessarily mean members of Congress. Decision makers can also include local and state officials. It can include natural resource managers. So for example, if you're working in or near a national park, there are decision makers who work for the Park Service who might be very interested in learning more about your research. So if you want to keep your day job and don't really want to dive feet first into the policy arena, if you're a student, you can take courses in policy. You can conduct informational interviews with people whose career paths you're interested in. You can enhance scientific literacy in general by doing things like giving community talks. You can also provide input during public comment periods for federal reports and draft policies. This is a really important opportunity that not all scientists know about to help inform and shape federal policies. And ESA sends out alerts around things like Federal Register notices, which are connected with public input periods. You can also serve on advisory boards and review panels for agencies, as well as efforts like those conducted by the National Research Council. You can collaborate with managers, decision makers, and local officials when you're doing your research. And if you do this, I would suggest reaching out early and often so that you're not simply developing a research presentation that you share at the end and consider that to be the engagement, but instead, before or as you are designing your research project, engage them so that the work that you're doing is shaped by what they'll find useful. And conducting work of high relevance to the policy community is very important. Share those findings broadly in formats that are usable by non-scientists. And with that, I think the bottom line here that I'd like to share is that you're never too junior to do this type of work. The policy arena really needs people at all career stages, and engaging early in your career can provide a lot of benefits. I know it has for me. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and feel free to send me an email if you'd like to connect. Thank you.